friends. Everyone's here. Excellent. So I just hopped over from a really fun conversation about digital nomad visas. So it's just like so wonderfully thematic to now like shift gears. I was just introducing a little bit about Plumia, so it'll be great to have that chat. So how's everyone doing?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so glad that you could join last minute, George. This is where it's nice to have so many friends doing interesting things because then you're
hmm
just like, hey, come play with me at this conference. And, honestly, I'm looking forward to having such a great conversation because I pinch myself sometimes that this is what I get to do professionally because we're here at Digital Nomad Week and we're like thought leaders, we're imagining the future, but you are just like all of you such like lovely, interesting people that I've enjoyed engaging with and like learning from. So yeah, looking forward to a fun time today on our chat about creating a country on the internet. Awesome. So welcoming today, Lauren, Hannah, and George. I would love for you to take it away yourselves. And yeah, let us know where you are joining from today and what your interest is in this whole country on the internet project and about how your work fits into this bigger picture. So maybe I'll ask George to go first.
Sure. So my name is George Samuels. I'm the managing director for FIA. We are a community tech consultancy. We specialize, though, building communities for the metaverse. So, Facebook's recent rebrand has been really great because it brings together, that our passion for blockchain tech and communities. How what we're doing, it relates to a country on the internet. Well, we actually got involved with helping a nation in the South Pacific start the process of actually moving a lot of their government services onto a blockchain. It's good to see Hannah from Estonia here as well, because Estonia is one of like a good example of how to do things right. But yeah, that's why I'm here and hope to share more about that.
Excellent. Yeah, taking it away then, Hannah, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work?
Sure. I'm Hannah. Nice to see you again, Lily. It's been a while. And happy to be here at Digital Nomad Week. I think eResidency is partnering this year with Digital Nomad Week, so it's nice to be representing one of the partners. So I'm the head of content at eResidency. As you might hear, I'm not Estonian, or you may not know, but I'm not Estonian. I'm Australian and British, but I'm working for the Estonian government, helping them roll out the e-residency program across the world. Essentially, e-residency gives foreigners, not Estonians, but people outside of Estonia's borders, a digital identity and the ability to authenticate themselves in Estonia's digital platforms. It is a digital society, which I'm sure I will talk a bit more about later, so that they can set up a company and run it remotely from wherever they are in the world without ever actually having to visit Estonia. This topic I think is perfect for e-residency and for Estonia as well, and I'm looking forward to the discussions we're having.
Absolutely. And are you joining us from Tallinn, or where are you right now?
Yes, I'm in Tallinn, and it was minus 20 degrees Celsius
today,
oh. Which apparently is about -1 Fahrenheit, I think.
Oh, okay. None of those things I like, but so many things about Estonia that I respect. And George, did you tell us where you were joining from?
Oh, I'm currently in Mexico. So I'd usually be in Singapore. But I'm in Mexico at the moment.
Yeah, so slightly nicer weather, I think, than
it's pleasant weather. Can't complain here.
Yeah, and so Lauren, where are you? How's the weather outside your window?
It's very dark and foggy and cold because I'm tuning in from Amsterdam, where winter is truly here, although apparently not quite as much as Estonia, from what Hannah has just said. And where are you today, Lily?
I am in Virginia, so I don't think you can see out, but like there's like woods and farm, and it's all very like bucolic and rural and nice stuff. It's a sunny day today, but it is pretty chilly. Yeah. So Lauren, would you care to introduce your work with Plumia and about the book that you've been writing and where you fit into this whole country on the internet conversation?
Sure. So my name is Lauren Razavi, and I'm the newly appointed Executive Director at Plumia. And I'm also author of a book called Global Natives. And Global Natives, I'll just say briefly, is kind of about the past, present, and future of the digital nomad movement, based on my own experiences, a lot of research, and a lot of interviews. And that's coming out next year. But Plumia is really the part that relates to the subject of the panel today. So Plumia is a non-profit mission to build an internet country specifically for digital nomads. And we are currently funded by and housed within the Nomad insurance company Safety Wing, I believe a Digital Nomad Week partner also, though we operate independently and at arm's length. So we're sort of at home there, but also a little bit separate, and making sure to, I guess, kind of delineate the part of the internet country mission that we're working on versus what Safety Wing are working on, which is more about the social safety net side of things. In a more practical sense, Plumia is a group of more than 1,000 digital nomads, remote workers, and global citizens from around the world. And we are working together to imagine and bring to life a more borderless world. Over the next year, we're going to be ramping up our operations considerably. And if anyone is interested in sort of following that journey, getting involved, we have a website at plumia.country, and you can sign up there to find out more and get an invite to our Discord server, which is in fact how Lily and I first met. So the power of community,
Yes.
sort of bringing this together today, or Plumia bringing us here today.
Yeah. I'm one of the volunteers on the passport team, right? So I think Plumia is so interesting because there are a number of different ways that we can imagine building a country on the internet. And the part that speaks to me that I'm deeply nerdy about is this whole notion of free movement and how we can like iterate on a better approach to visas and movement across borders, right? And I have loved just being able to connect with other people who are so passionate. And so my co-author on this digital nomad visa white paper I'm working on is someone I just found just in the Discord chat. We were just like really enjoying sending articles, and like we were always commenting on everyone each other's stuff. So we're like, hey, maybe we should like have a call. And then out of this random serendipitous connection, we were like, hey, actually, like we're both like skilled writers. Let's like work on this together. And it's been so wonderful to have a teammate in all this. And I think this goes back to the power of community, right? And how we foster connections. And something that I've really enjoyed about Plumia is this kind of community first approach that we're going to start by bringing people together and forming a culture, right? And then we're going to do all these behind the scenes things, very technical, that Lauren, you're going to lay the groundwork for about how we actually move, like level up with that. But it all starts with community. And so that's what I would love to, throw out to the panel. When it comes to creating your version of a country on the internet, how does community fit into that vision? Anyone is welcome to take that prompt. Any hands raised, or do I have to call on someone? George, you made your eyeballs real big. Good. Sure. Jump in.
It's interesting because I guess as human beings, always, like we want to be borderless, yet we still want our groupings and identity, right? Like an identity to be formed. And I guess this is how I found myself in the blockchain space, and what I'm seeing with this sort of emergence of the metaverse, et cetera, right? Like take away the jargon. What we're kind of seeing now is that communities may actually have the ability to move freely with their data, right? Which kind of means that platforms that we're used to today that we kind of congregate on, most of the data is going there. And as sort of this new technology is allowing people to own more of their data, as they're able to move that around, the identities kind of start moving away or detaching themselves from these platforms. And personally, as somebody who's kind of grown up like moving around a lot, the idea of just having like an Earth citizenship, I've always been for that, because I think it just would take away all of the issues, of this nation by nation thing.
Give us that backstory, George. Enrich your story for us, because I think people would be interested.
Sure. So I was born in Fiji to a Fijian Indian father and a Tuvaluan Samoan mother, and moved to Australia. So Melbourne, when I was about 2, stayed there until I was 8. Then moved to Bangladesh and lived there for about 10 years. During that time, we were fortunate enough to also travel around a lot from Bangladesh. But that really shaped my worldview, where I learned about the other term, third culture kid. So some here will definitely be familiar with that. And yep. So it's no coincidence that most of us who are third culture kids are digital nomads. The ability to move freely, right, and just feel at home wherever you are, as long as you've got the right people there. And so, yeah, that's kind of like my cultural background and history, and what has led me towards even technologies and work that allow me the freedom to be able to move around. I'm in Mexico right now, so go figure.
Yeah, it's so many of us who like never quite fit to just be like, okay, so now we're just gonna make a gang of us that don't quite fit together, and we're gonna like put it on the blockchain apparently, right?
Misfits.
Yeah. So Hannah, what does community mean to you in the context of your work and creating company on the internet and Estonia's initiatives?
Absolutely. I might talk about it in two ways. The first way is the very obvious way, which is that we have a community of e-residents and people around e-residency, an ecosystem, as we call it, of service providers, of government officials, of everyone who makes the program work. But like, I think I might actually talk a little bit more about how it started in Estonia originally, because basically Estonia, when it came out of its occupation from the Soviet Union, it didn't really have anything. So it built itself on the internet. And I think a lot of Estonians would probably disagree with the idea that a nation is not necessarily a good concept, because they are very proud of their nationhood and of their culture and language, because they've been occupied for so much of their history. So in that sense, I think that's something that I think is one really cool thing about Estonia, that they basically built their country on the internet. They're almost 100% digital now as a society. And for them, I think a lot of it was part of actually becoming part of the global community. So it was making sure that they stayed relevant, they attracted investment, both economic but also cultural, sociocultural, and now with the e-residency, with the digital nomad visa, with a whole bunch of other programs that they have going on in this country, it's to attract people to come to the country, or at least to bring their business here as well. So in that sense, I think for the nation of Estonia, it's really important from their perspective, because it means that they're, punching above their weight in the global community, both in business, in the digital nomad scene, in the tech scene, everything. So yeah, that's maybe a slightly different take than I would normally start with this discussion, but yeah. You're on mute, Lily. Actually, while she's getting off mute, I just wanted to say, George, that I was born in New Zealand, but grew up in Australia, but actually spent 4 years in Fiji as a youngster. So I'm a third culture kid. Yeah, exactly, bula bula. So I'm a third culture kid, but having spent time in Fiji.
Small world.
See, this is the wonderful part. Like, the backstories are so enriching, and like, honestly, like, would any of us be here doing the work that we're doing and be so passionate about it if it didn't connect with us inside, right? So yeah, Lauren, on to you. Talk to us about your backstory, about community, about your thoughts on this country on the internet.
Sure. So since we're getting the whole like family growing up stuff out, I will go there. My dad was or is a refugee from Iran to the UK following the Iranian Revolution in 1979. So I was raised with a very keen awareness of what it meant to have a British passport rather than a Persian passport, which I think was really influential in the way that I understood nation states, power structures in the world. And essentially, like, growing up, all of our family holidays were to other countries to spend time in these pockets of Iran in other countries. Like, the Iranian diaspora is extremely vast and extremely close-knit. So you very much can go and spend time in Germany or Dubai or the US and sort of find yourself in this kind of pocket of Iran. And I have lots of cousins. So I got very used to kind of having these international relationships where, we might not see each other for a year or two, but then when when we did see each other. It was picking straight back up where we left off. And I think all of those early experiences have been really, really influential in the way I've navigated the world as an adult. So I've been a remote worker since 2010, before I went to university, and I've been a digital nomad since 2013. And just to give even more color here, perhaps, we're not quite at the end of 2021 yet, but in September, I got married on the internet using the state of Utah's borderless wedding service. And I've married an Australian who grew up between Australia and the UK. So just continuing this into adulthood of being very international and very on the internet with my life.
Yeah. So, in what way does your background or the communities that you feel a part of relate to your work here, creating a country on the internet?
So I think any kind of impact and activism work is as much about who you are as it is about what you do. So I think all of that really informs my perspective on what a community is and why building a country on the internet is important. So I always think of that Margaret Mead quote: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And I think for me, that's what community starts with. I've been involved. I did a political science degree for my undergrad. So I've always been very, very involved with political activism and political ideas. And it's definitely been my experience that when you find common interests, common problems, and sort of shared perspectives on social, political, and economic issues, that's a really, really strong foundation to actually do something to bring about the world that you'd like to see, the place that you'd like to live, the circumstances that you would like to kind of see your kids grow up in. So for me, it's really about trying to build the world that I want to live in. And through Plumia, completely by surprise, I found a bunch of people that share that perspective. And for the first time, I think, in my life, felt like I wasn't the weird misfit, to use Hannah's word from a few moments ago. Instead, I'm actually part of a global community that's really thriving and really wanting to make the world a better place.
Yeah, I'm right with you there. So my mother is Thai and my dad's American, and he was in the Peace Corps while my mother was studying. So that's how they met, right? And so now I have the benefit of 2 passports, which is super handy. And so how I sort of got involved into this, thinking about country on the internet stuff is deeply personal. My then boyfriend, now husband, and father of this child that who's going to have 3 passports, we just started dating, and I was hearing from him and all of these other people about Thailand really hassling digital nomads about their visas. And I was like, what? No, you guys are my friends. I'm really into you. How do you stay? So I offered to marry him way too early in the relationship. But, things still worked out. I haven't been able to make a digital nomad visa happen for Thailand, but it's been really interesting work to engage in. And so on that topic, right, Lauren, I remember we were talking because we were both trying to get married at the same time. I ended up being able to bribe a public official in Thailand to get it done because due to COVID, they were only offering these services to Thai citizens. And I was like, I'm a Thai citizen marrying a non-Thai citizen. I'm still a Thai citizen. Why don't I get these services? And they were like, because COVID. So it was really bizarre, right? So I looked into getting married online by the state of Utah, which I think is really funny because Estonia does everything online basically, except for let people get married, divorce, and buy property. Is that correct, Hannah?
It changed during COVID. So now the only thing you can't do is get divorced.
Oh, hey! See, so that's so interesting. And that takes me sort of to the next thing I want to explore, right? So building a country on the internet and the services that a country provides, or what a country kind of means, right? Its services, its identity, it's your culture, community. There's so many different things. So in the work that you do, what's your notion of the next level of country? How do we do country better in the future? So I'm going to leave that purposely vague to let that mean whatever it might mean to you. And I'll call on Hannah to take it away.
Put me in the deep end. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, rather than talking about what I imagine in the future as being better, maybe I can talk about, as an outsider living in Estonia, and working for e-residency and observing this country and the services they provide to their citizens, and now also to non-citizens as well with e-residency. I think that they are a pretty good model for many other countries that maybe aren't doing such a good job. So they take a pretty entrepreneurial approach, and a very service-based approach. So whenever you join us, like an app or some kind of tech, like social media or a tech firm or something, and you're always getting surveyed and you're always getting asked, like, how can we do better? Estonia does that. The government ministries do that, and they do it like in a way where they actually take the feedback on and put it into place. And I see this every day with the product team that works on e-residency and our developers as well. And it's not just e-residency; it's many other government ministries here. For example, when with the health department putting out the vaccines and all these kinds of things, they were constantly sending messages and making sure that we had all the information possible, this kind of stuff. So I think that's something that I would say this country does very well, and maybe other countries could learn from. Is this kind of it's not just about making laws for citizens and like putting them in place and leaving the structures there, but having a dialogue with the people and so that when you implement the laws or make the laws and make the policies, they're actually making sense for the people that you're serving.
Yeah, that's so noteworthy and quite exceptional, honestly. You would think that that's how countries want to be run, but sometimes the mechanics of that sort of gunk up the works, right? But it's that startup approach to iterating and improving. And at the end of the day, a lot of that startup wisdom just comes down to know your customer and talk to them, right? And it's like, yes, of course, countries should be doing this. George, tell us about your work and what you think the future of nation states could be.
Yeah, sure. So it's an interesting one because our work in the South Pacific hasn't really been done before for that region. So over the last couple of years, there have been nations who've been trying to use cryptocurrencies, right? Create their own cryptocurrencies like everybody else back in 2017, 18 and onwards. But we had a very different approach because we believe that the data aspect of a blockchain is the most important thing. And that is what you kind of want to help, say a nation start moving their assets over to. In the islands, right, culture is a very strong thing. And places, very small island nations like Tuvalu or Samoa, they've had previously the issue of being too remote, right? And so job opportunities, those sort of things were always limited. But now with sort of the improving internet infrastructure, and then also things like blockchain technology and now NFTs, I think people are starting to get like, if people can purchase like an NFT for $1 million off a rock, right? Like surely there are some other valuable assets that, other countries have that are truly valuable for them. But we're also seeing a very unique situation with, sort of geopolitics, right? As people start to come to the realization that, hey, we can own our own data. What does that mean for a country or platforms and companies that have typically own that? How will that all work? And so we've kind of planned for 10, 20 years from now to help sort of these type of nations move towards this sort of future whereby their isolation and their remoteness no longer is a disadvantage, but it can actually be a huge advantage for them. And places like, say, for example, Tuvalu, they have a very serious threat due to climate change and rising ocean levels, where if the country disappears, then what? And so in the engineering sector, there's, the concept of a digital twin, which once upon a time was kind of like, not worth the resources. Now it's actually becoming a huge thing. So a lot of people are looking at creating digital twins of everything. And this is where you have, I think, even in Seoul, South Korea, they are going all in on the metaverse, and everything is starting to move into this digital realm, right? Even more so. Like people, all of us here, like we're already using digital, but it's where that the blurred lines of reality that, you know, this metaverse is sort of exposing us to is what is becoming really interesting. And so I think what's interesting as well is that we talk about resources being finite, which they are. But human beings are very innovative, right? We always end up finding new sources of energy and new ways of doing things. And so with the limitations or the perceived limitations, this digital universes and multiverse, metaverse, it's providing opportunities for people to create serious incomes now. Axie Infinity being an example of this game that is helping, you know, like the poor in the Philippines actually replace, you know, their traditional incomes. So like all of this is nation building already, but it is shedding the old sort of national borders. And so people are now forming new digital identities. That's why there's so much about like having a digital avatar, right? And then having, you know, Bored Ape Yacht Club. You know, although these type of things are kind of exclusive social memberships at the moment, it is the social signals that I'm seeing that all this technology is sort of forming for people to understand that it's happening and that even nations need to kind of pay attention to this consumer-driven behavior.
That's like insane. You kind of blown my mind that something like the metaverse isn't just like a fun, unique gaming-based kind of like opportunity, but it's actually something like a solution to a country's existential crisis.
Yes.
That really just shifts my thinking in a whole new way. Wow.
Yeah.
Lauren, do you have any other mind-blowing concepts to introduce? We're setting the bar high now. Tell us about what you think about the nation of the future, the country on the internet.
I'll try to blow your mind, but no guarantees. I think that a country at its core is simply a community, but we are seeing the meaning of a country, of a state changing. And in fact, to pick up on George mentioning Tuvalu, I saw a story recently that as a country, Tuvalu is aiming to retain its status, its sort of statehood, even if climate change takes away its physical territory. I find that really interesting from a Plumia perspective, because if that is granted, it really opens the door for projects like ours and other entities to gain recognition in that same regard of really understanding a country as a community as opposed to a sovereign territory, which, you know, I think we all take for granted quite a lot. We think, oh, of course, countries have always been here. Like the nation state is obviously like something we can't really question. But actually, it was a bunch of like European elite dudes in 1648 who came up with this idea. And we simply haven't like advanced other ideas to replace it, despite the technology changing so much over the generations. So yeah, that's just kind of an aside, but I thought maybe it would be interesting to say something in response to this question about the purpose of Plumia, because I think that people probably have like an understanding of what a country is based on the nation state whose passports they hold, but actually thinking a little bit more, sort of digging down into it, I think it becomes about what you're trying to accomplish for a community. That's actually a huge part of the definition of a country in these terms. So for Plumia, one thing that we're really concerned about doing, and user research in terms of the people who have kind of signed up to be citizens of Plumia so far, tells us that this is a big priority for Nomads, is actually to represent Nomads' interests and rights on the global stage. And that's particularly around global mobility, as remote work and nomad lifestyles are hitting the mainstream. That mission, I think, matters a lot right now, because without a political voice, nomads really find themselves at the whims of not just one government, but actually every government in the world, which could cause us a lot of practical issues. And I can tell you from work I've done inside governments and policy institutions that they're really scrambling to catch up. Like there's not a good understanding right now of digital nomads and their kind of unique needs and what they kind of represent about the future. So I think that representation is really, really important. And then there's this kind of other aspect to Plumia where we are focusing very, very hard on this global mobility idea. So we want to achieve the functionality of a global passport prior to actually achieving a global passport. So what that means in practice is helping to guide policy, helping to introduce global standards, and actually sort of helping to sort of open the door in particular to things like reciprocal arrangements between countries, as opposed to everybody in silo sort of launching their own digital nomad visa. We really want to kind of work to advance all of this a lot more quickly than I think is possible without the involvement of actual nomad users of global mobility. If we think of that as a single kind of concept, we are like the primary, the kind of early adopter users, and I think we really have an opportunity to shape that. And so when I think about the countries of the future, I think we're going to see a lot more sort of niche and interest communities like Plumia. Plumia is the one that's popped up for digital nomads, but there are other sort of internet country projects also popping up around different communities as well.
Yeah. So continuing on that thread, Illumide hosted a conversation debating about digital nomad visas yesterday with Andreas Wilgerdes and John Lee. And one of the things that they threw out, because Andreas's expertise goes way back in terms of like the telecom era, and he was talking about how SIM cards became a thing and how credit cards became a thing. And so we considered like, okay, so how do we take what we learned from making these technologies global and connected and trusted amongst many parties and apply that to this concept of passports and digital nomad visas. And one of the things that came out was this idea of an identity, right? Like, so many of these nomad visas require you to get like fingerprinted or to have a police background check. You have to have a valid passport. So these things are essentially an identity kit, right? Which I think Hannah could speak about that. But yeah, maybe I'll invite Lauren to go first, because some people were like, hell no, I'm not becoming a barcode to a government. I don't trust governments with that information. And other people are like, absolutely, yes. If it would improve my options, like I would happily provide this package of data. So what's your take on this notion of a digital identity as something that can move the needle forward on an initiative like Plumia?
I think it's absolutely essential. Like the idea that we trust traditional governments with identity verification, like as a world, given their sort of varying levels of competency. And this is in no way meant as an insult to Estonia, who I think are absolutely the world. But you look at some of the governments that are, or the governments that are kind of like leading to failed states, and you realize that this is a huge responsibility. And if we want to solve problems like refugee crises, if we want to protect stateless people and make sure people don't end up stateless, identity verification is like the primary service that we need to take out of the hands of governments and corrupt officials and instead put into the hands of people. Web3 and decentralized technologies really give us the opportunity to do that in technical terms. So one of the projects that we at Plumia are really interested in sort of trying to integrate with and trying to support the work of is Proof of Humanity, which is a collaboration between Santiago Siri of Democracy Earth and the Claros Foundation. And they are essentially sort of looking at alternative ways to do identity verification, which are actually a lot better and a lot more sophisticated in many regards than the ways that people get passports at the moment. So I think it's really interesting to kind of look at what else is happening in the space and look at integrating projects as opposed to everybody trying to build everything from scratch. I think that there's going to be some really sort of interesting opportunities there to bring different kind of players together, different kinds of technologies together to build something that can kind of fill this void. I'm going to share in the chat, I wrote an essay earlier in the year with some of my ideas for Plumia. And one of the things I propose in there is a global citizen record. And I'm not particularly bullish on the idea that Plumia should provide that, but I think it's something that should exist, essentially a way for people to get their police checks, their identification, their marriage certificates, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
into an accepted digital interface that governments can interact with. And that actually, I mean, there are technical ways in terms of verification to look at these things without actually, in fact, maybe Hannah can speak to this, but for governments to be able to look at these things in ways which are very sort of accountable, i.e.,
right, permission-based, discrete. Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of opportunities there, and it's definitely like the primary thing that needs to be redesigned to overcome some of the global problems that we have right now, specifically around refugees and statelessness.
Yeah, so I may ask George to pick this one up next as sort of like our representative, like blockchain guy, right? So no, a lot of conversations I have with the sort of blockchain crypto community, there is a very strong like anarcho-libertarian bent. It's like governments don't have control over me. That's a construct I wholly reject. So what's your own perspective, and maybe what are some of the things that you think that community might care about with regards to identity?
Yeah, it's really interesting watching this space from like 2013 and over a decade ago when I was in my university days. I was like quite the out in protests and screw the government and all as well. But it's funny, as you mature and you get involved with the real world, you realize the power dynamics, you realize like where real change needs to happen. Mm-hmm. And you also realize that if you want something to work for the world, that has to include government. Mm-hmm. Because government is still an entity that like a large majority of populations trust, And so it's ironic that a lot of folks in the space and, talking about, I guess, crypto communities, the sort of growth of even Bitcoin in the early days was due to a lot of these anarchic types, and so we can kind of thank them for that. But the irony is that Bitcoin was actually, just as an example, was designed to be able to have like an immutable audit trail, essentially, in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. Right. So everything that everybody's been doing, they've thought that, I can sort of like launder money. Well, now they're finding out with all the regulations and the government finally catching up and getting up to speed with the technology, they're able to go back in time and find, catch a whole bunch of people out. So just, I wrote a message down there about, for a lot of what we're seeing in this space to even work, there actually kind of does need to be a single blockchain with, just like we have a single internet. Because what's happened in the space is that everybody's followed the money, greed. I mean, it's natural, human beings, yeah. Right? We got the good and the bad. Everybody's gone, hey, I could use this tech to like create my own currency. So now we have even more currencies in the market. We already had quite a lot with every single nation. And the crypto space has just like multiplied that, tenfold. So my view is that governments do need to be part of the conversation. And if you want a blockchain to actually work, then the way it does is if both players, so like citizens and government, use the same chain. Mm-hmm. That's where the accountability comes in. Now, it's interesting because you'll see some nations, if they are doing shady stuff, they're not going to want to have a blockchain. And there's already been movements about like private blockchains. But those are kind of misnomers because you can't have a private blockchain. A blockchain is public by nature. So all these sort of things, I know it might be like technical jargon, but it's what I've seen over the last decade and why I'm a believer that governments need to be part of the conversation, and why the work that we do is actually working with government on the data of the blockchain side, as opposed to we're using blockchain to create a new cryptocurrency for you so you can get rich quick. That's not what we see in the future. That's just like an aside.
Yeah. I can definitely see both sides of that coin, because as someone, I'm a Thai citizen and an American citizen. And so there's varying degrees of trust in the communities that I come from. And, in Thailand, the last time we had a series of elections, it was basically completely bogus, right? And so there is, not all countries are equally representative and trustworthy. And that is something that an improved approach to identity and accountability can hopefully address. Lauren, I think you had everyone's got comments. Now we have to hear from Hannah too. Yeah.
Yes.
Hannah.
I just had kind of a question back to George, which is my understanding is actually that a lot of global banks have been developing their own private blockchains.
Yes.
And so how do you see that interacting with this idea of, I guess, private blockchains not being as appealing as an overall blockchain?
Yep. So those private blockchains, many of the big players have already come up with issues, or they've kind of like hit a wall. One, either from a technological side with the scaling stuff, and some, like even IBM, they actually had to disband their blockchain team. And I think they just like reshuffled some things. Others who were, continuing on with this private blockchain route, it's going to be only limited to sort of their partners and their vendors, right? So to be honest, you could just use a normal database for that, if that's what you're going after. And so it's kind of like they're just going to have to learn the hard way. And we're seeing this already. So we're just playing the patient game, working with those who get it now. But as mentioned before, we already are seeing 10 to 20 years out from here on.
Yeah, that's really interesting that this, like the underlying technology is what reinforces this hopefully better behavior.
Yes.
Yeah, can I add on here just from the Estonian experience?
Please.
Because it's essentially a blockchain, what the digital ID is on here, although it was sort of launched before blockchain was a thing. So it wasn't called blockchain when it started, but now they call it the KSI blockchain. And basically it means that, the security of your digital identity is, as secure as you can keep it. So the card itself has a unique number which identifies you. And that's not necessarily something that you need to keep private. But then you have your PIN codes, one for authentication and one for confirmation, transactional confirmation. And those are the things you need to keep private and personal. And without both, you can't really do anything. The other thing that I think is really key here is in Estonia, you personally own your own data. So, and you can see whenever anyone has accessed it. So for example, I went to the doctor the other day to get my flu vaccination. I logged into the health service with my ID card and I booked my appointment. I went to the appointment. I had my vaccination. I came home and I checked and it was already in the system, and you can see where the doctor, identified it with their code as well, has put in, that they've given me the vaccination. So I can already see that. If, for example, I went to the GP, or if I had kids and I was checking my kids' medical records, I could see whether a doctor had looked at their records and when and what they'd done in there. And that's the same for, your motor vehicle registries, your teaching, education, these kinds of things. So you can always see what's being done with your information, and only certain people are allowed to actually view certain things. Yep. And there have been people who've gotten in trouble for going into places where they shouldn't have, looking at ex-lovers information, these kinds of things. They've been prosecuted. So so it's enforced really well. And then on the banking thing, this is something that I've been thinking about for a while. It's a little bit separate from e-residency, although not completely, because we have the issue of making sure our e-residents can access banking, global banking. But I think this is probably a topic for digital nomads as well. I also listened to Andreas and John yesterday with Olumide, and when he was talking about credit cards and SIM cards, I was thinking, now with the rise of fintechs, like the Wises of the world, Stripes, there seems to be a new one every day. I was thinking, surely that is sort of the next frontier, having these fintechs really making global banking solutions. And I know that they're also now looking at crypto and looking at NFT trading and investing and these kinds of things. So I'm hopeful from both personal and professional perspective that we're seeing something moving there on the banking front.
Yeah. So returning to something that you said earlier, Hannah, that I think is so important, a lot of times the conversation around privacy and data privacy, we feel that as individuals, we're constantly having to give things up and we don't have control, right? I think that's such an excellent point that you bring up, is that this accountability can go both ways. It just requires a paradigm shift and people to actually implement the technology that is right there. It's accountability. It says that I give this to you, you give this to me, and we can see exactly what's going on. We have that insight, that transparency, and that sense of ownership and follow through and accountability. And that's really all comes down to the technology that powers all of this, right? So we've still got about 15 minutes left in this conversation. So I wanna talk a little bit about just have a little bit of fun and go explore into the tech side and just play a little. Yeah. So I'm interested in hearing your different perspectives on this headline that's come out in the last couple of weeks of so Barbados was one of the first countries that managed to like launch a digital nomad visa. Leaving aside whether that's a good visa or not, they're also making headlines now for being the first country to launch an embassy in the metaverse, right? And so this is an initiative that's being led by one of their ambassadors, who is also really key in integrating crypto payments for Barbados. So it's not like they're just doing the metaverse thing. There's a lot more going on around this. So having an embassy in the metaverse, what are your thoughts on this? Is this just like the first of many to come? Do you think it's hype? Like, what's your perspective on this whole experience? Anyone want to go first?
I don't really have an opinion. Maybe just correct the record that there were countries who had embassies in Second Life in the 2000s.
Yes,
including Estonia.
Including Estonia. So do you know if Estonia is planning to do this in the metaverse in the newly
I'm not
created
sure.
one?
I haven't heard anything, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone from the Estonia team announced it. But yeah, it's just saying. It's just got to correct the record. But I don't have an opinion on it otherwise.
Absolutely. Thank you for that very valuable correction. There's a lot of hype now around the metaverse, but Second Life was already kind of reinventing this whole concept. Yeah, George, did you want to jump in on that topic?
Yeah, I think I mentioned Seoul, right, going all in, and they have like the infrastructure to do that. Like that's kind of like I'm not surprised, that they're doing that. So I think with the amount of attention that it's getting and the amount of money that's going towards it now, with companies like Facebook, now Meta, it's here. It's going to happen. I think there are going to be more and more people exploring the boundaries of what's possible, and kind of like the cycles we always see with any sort of new frontier, you're going to see people just play and imagine new things. And then you get all the sort of scammers come into the picture and try to take advantage of all those people without the rules. And then you sort of see like governments and regulation come in to sort of like kind of bring some order to the chaos. So I think if governments can learn even from like being on the back foot with the crypto space, but being on the front with this metaverse space and get in and play as well, I think it'll be better for them to understand what's going on, because governments, right, traditionally have always been a little bit behind, except for Estonia and a few other countries. But yeah, I think this is it's real, it's happening. I'm excited for it, but I understand also there are many practical things that we need to consider, because yeah, Second Life, I remember Second Life back in the day, like there were so many interesting things going on there. Like I remember almost getting into a relationship with like this digital avatar, but then I was like, wait, who are they in real life? Are they like, like a real person, and could I be like, I don't know, dating like just somebody that I wouldn't do like in real life, right? Yeah. And so this is where that whole thing about what's real and what's not, and would you want to like just completely engage with digital avatars? All those questions are coming up.
Can you give us a little bit of a nugget? Because you're sort of saying that like, what are some of the concrete problems that we are going to have to figure out, like looking beyond the hype a little bit? I'm curious.
Yeah, real versus not real, right? I'm a little bit into my astrology stuff, in a practical sense, yes. But, there are some people who talk about in the previous age, we had this age of Pisces, right? And the age of Pisces was dictated by belief. In the age of Aquarius, which is what we're apparently moving into, it's all about truth. And so when we look at truth in the metaverse, what would be true? What you intend and create as a digital avatar, or your real world personality, right? So questions around morality and ethics and things really come into play, because it's like, if you do something wrong in the metaverse, right, and there's no real world consequences, is it okay? Yeah. And this is where I'm very interested in the blockchain aspect. If it underpins a metaverse, that becomes a way to have accountability of things, right? That it still connects us to the real world ideally, where you still need to have some sort of identity interface from the real world to the digital, so that you know that even if somebody's creating digital avatars, if anything kind of goes wrong, there's sort of an audit trail to identify like who is the source in the real world, and that can be traced more easily from all fronts,
Yeah.
whether it's government or natural citizen. But
Yeah.
that's kind of like the ideal.
I thought you were going to go in a totally like tech description, and like this is like a whole philosophical conversation, right?
Yes.
So I kind of love it. Lauren, I've been keeping up with what you've been publishing so far on your book, Global Natives, but I missed this blog post. So you've really looked into Barbados, right, for their Nomad visa. What are your thoughts around their more recent developments with the whole Metaverse Embassy?
Yeah, before I say something about that, given that I have spent the last year writing a book, I want to just raise a point on language here with George. George, I'm sorry to disagree with you. I know that's always like a touchy thing to do on a panel, but I really object to the use of real versus non-real to describe like online interactions versus offline interactions. And so I just want to say that I really believe that tech doesn't change human behavior, and that everything we do, whether it's in a metaverse or it's in Discord or it's on a panel like this, is just as real as being in a room with people. And we actually need to, I think, culturally encourage that perspective to make sure that we are actually like treating people with in-person levels of civility on the internet as well as offline. I think that distinction is something that could really sort of become more troubling. It's already troubling in some ways, but in the years ahead. So I just wanted to say that. But yes, Barbados. I think Barbados is one of the smartest underdog nations out there. And they've got a really good eye for destination marketing opportunities, which is exactly what they did really successfully with the digital nomad visa. And I think that's what they're doing with launching an embassy in the metaverse as well. I think we'll probably see quite a lot of these sort of metaverse related publicity stunts in the coming months and years from countries and from other players. But I really question whether they're going to create actual value. I also question whether Zuckerberg's metaverse is going to create any actual value, and whether Facebook is, prior to its rebrand, whether it had really reached a place where it was adding value to people's lives anymore. So yeah, I would say I'm very skeptical. But in general, like if you think about it more in terms of Barbados' strategy, I think they're a really smart nation. I'm looking forward to battling with them as an internet country as they kind of up things to the cloud.
Yeah, I think they also ditched the Queen and decided to make Rihanna a national icon. So, I mean, just Barbados. Whoa. Awesome. So we've got about 5 minutes left to sort of wrap up the conversation. And then that's like day 2 of Digital Nomad Week. I would honestly, I would have this conversation all day. So I'm just throwing it out there, Lauren, that like Plumia Country on the Internet conference. I think we have enough people so we could make that really fun. So as we sort of wrap up this just amazing chat, just honestly, guys, I'm having like the time of my life. Can you tell us, so with the work that you're doing or the sort of objectives you're trying to achieve with creating a country on the internet, how can people learn more about your work, or how can they engage with you and support you? Go ahead and throw that out there. Hannah, are you like well-resourced? Like the government of Estonia is just like, do all the things, Hannah, you can have whatever you want. Do you need any help, or what can we do to make your life easier?
Become e-residents, become part of our community, start a company and run it from wherever you are. No, the e-residency is fully funded for the next few years. It's something that I think Estonia is going all in on. They really believe in it, which is really good news for me and also our team. And I think also good news for the sort of the global community of the growing global community of entrepreneurs. So looking for different solutions. So I think what I'm excited about is that we're expanding both in terms of resources, in terms of our team, in terms of where we're going to be able to actually properly serve customers in markets that maybe before we haven't been so good at. in sort of countries, low to middle income countries where we haven't had pickup locations for the card, these kinds of things. So that's something that I'm really excited about in the next few years, because I think that's where we can really make the difference, where entrepreneurs who want to go global with their businesses or as freelancers can use e-residency and can start a company in Estonia, in Europe, and make a living and provide themselves with a new opportunity in that sense. So that's what I'm excited about in the next few years. And check out our website, and I'm writing on the blog. So there's lots of inspirational stories about real life e-residents as well. Lily, you've even written for the blog as well. So keeping it in the fam.
And also hyping your fantastic Facebook group, because again, it's the power of community. It's like there's so many people in there who are so helpful to like answer questions down to the detail for anyone who's curious. You have so many resources.
Yeah. So thanks for having me again, and I'm always happy to be part of Digital Nomad Week.
Excellent. Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, George, how can people connect with you, learn about your projects, and support your work?
Sure. Anywhere on socials, I'm going to put it into the chat for folks, at George Siosi, any of the socials there. What else? Yeah, I'll just put the links there in the chat, so it's kind of easier for people. For people to connect.
Yeah, because you're working on you're working on Faya. You're still working on Anna, your accountability system. Are you still running the pack?
Yes, the pack now has migrated from Slack into Anna, because this is all part of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So for any of entrepreneurs, especially people in the tech and crypto space, George runs fantastic communities.
Accountable.
Yes. Accountability. It's a key theme. Lauren, tell us, so tell us where we can find your book. Tell us how we can support your work and engage in these wonderful initiatives you're part of.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'm always bad at plugging, so let's try and get this right. My book is coming out next year. It's available for pre-order. I shared the link in the chat before, but I'll share it again now. I also have personally like a free weekly newsletter. And if you were to sign up to that today, I'll share that link just now, you will hear and receive a link to the policy paper that I have coming out tomorrow with the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. The policy paper is all about remote work, digital nomads, and the future of citizenship. And that's probably the easiest way to get a copy of that would be to sign up for my newsletter. And we are also doing Twitter Spaces. I've just shared that link as well, so you can set a reminder if you're interested to talk about that policy work on Thursday morning or Friday morning. I think it's Friday morning European time. So dive in. And then Premier, again, I've shared like the link earlier in the chat, but I'll share it again now. You can submit an application to become involved with Premier through the website. From there, you will get a link to join our Discord and can start getting involved in the conversations. You will see me and Lily there making trouble all the time. And we are going to be putting out some more content and things in the months to come. So that's also a good way to just kind of keep up with Premier, is by putting your details in our application form on the website for now. And thank you very, very much to you, Lily, for being a fantastic moderator, and to Digital Nomad Week for putting this on.
Yeah, this has been so much fun. And yeah, it's when you're hanging out with wonderful people doing such interesting things, how can you not have a great time? So thank you again for jumping in, and George, especially for joining so last minute. I'm so glad that we got you on here. And yeah, look forward to networking with you as we continue Digital Nomad Week and continuing to engage as we all work on making the world a new and exciting and mobile, fun place. Thanks you, everyone.
Thanks, Lily. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.